Most government storage facilities hold office supplies and old paperwork, but Warehouse 23 in Nevada contains objects that shouldn't exist, mirrors that show other worlds, music boxes that play songs from the future, and photographs that change when nobody's looking. My first day on the job, they showed me a snow globe that contains a living miniature town where tiny people go about their daily lives, completely unaware that they're being watched. The worst part isn't cataloging these impossible things or watching them do what they shouldn't be able to do. It's knowing that every item in our collection was taken from someone who had no idea the government was monitoring their unusual possessions, and understanding that there are thousands more warehouses, just like this one, scattered across the country. My name is Marcus Anderson, and I never planned to work for what my supervisor calls the Anomalous Materials Division. 6 months ago, I was teaching high school physics in Bakersfield, California, trying to explain electromagnetic fields to teenagers who cared more about their phones than science. That was before the accident at Kern River, before I watched my brother Danny get pulled under by something that looked like water, but moved with purpose. The official report blamed flash flooding from upstream rainfall. The local news ran a standard drowning story for 3 days, then moved on to traffic updates and weather forecasts. But I knew what I'd seen. The river had reached up like fingers, wrapping around Danny's legs while he stood waist deep, fishing for trout. No current moves that way. No water grabs. I spent weeks filing reports with every agency I could find. Fish and Wildlife, Environmental Protection, even the CDC. Most ignored me. A few sent form letters about grief counseling. Then Dr. Elena Vasquez showed up at my apartment with a manila folder and the job offer that came with a relocation package to Henderson, Nevada. "Mr. Anderson," she'd said, setting a photograph on my kitchen table. "This was taken by a hiker 3 miles upstream from where your brother died." The image showed the river bending upward in a perfect spiral, defying gravity for roughly 10 seconds according to the timestamp. We've been monitoring unusual hydrological events in that area for 18 months. Your brother wasn't the first. The AMD facility sits 30 miles outside Las Vegas, disguised as a solar research station. Solar panels cover the roof, and legitimate scientists work in the front building, studying renewable energy and publishing papers in academic journals. But the real work happens underground, in climate-controlled chambers, where we store objects that make theoretical physicists question everything they thought they understood about reality. Dr. Vasquez handed me 6 protocols on my first day, printed on plain white paper, no official letterhead, no security classifications. "These keep you alive," she told me. "Follow them exactly. The moment you start improvising, we'll be shipping your personal effects back to Bakersfield." I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded explanations for why a high school teacher with no security clearance was being trusted with government secrets. Instead, I thought about Danny's face disappearing beneath water that moved like syrup, and I signed the employment contract without reading the fine print. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm writing this down because protocol requires documentation, and because I'm starting to understand what Dr. Vasquez meant about the fine print. The elevator descended for 43 seconds, I counted, an old habit from timing lab experiments with my students. When the doors opened, I stepped into a corridor that belonged in a medical facility rather than a government warehouse. White walls, polished floors that squeaked under my shoes, and the smell of antiseptic mixed with something metallic I couldn't identify. Dr. Vasquez walked ahead of me, her heels clicking against the linoleum. She wore a lab coat over business clothes, and her dark hair was pulled back in a bun, secured with what looked like a vintage hairpin. Everything about her suggested precision. The way she checked her watch, how she swiped her key card without breaking stride, the manner in which she adjusted her glasses before speaking. "Your primary responsibility involves documentation," she said, stopping at a door marked Storage Level C. "Every object requires detailed observation logs. Date, time, behavioral changes, temperature fluctuations. Think of it as scientific method applied to things that shouldn't follow scientific laws." The storage room beyond the door stretched further than the building's exterior dimensions should have allowed. Rows of metal shelving extended into shadows that seemed deeper than adequate lighting should permit. Each shelf held tagged items, some in glass cases, others in sealed containers, a few sitting openly as if they were ordinary artifacts in a museum. "Your workstation." Dr. Vasquez gestured toward a desk positioned near the entrance. A computer terminal, clipboard, and digital camera sat beside a thermos of coffee that was still steaming. "Someone brought this for you this morning, though our security cameras show no one entering the building before 6 a.m. I stared at the thermos. The coffee smelled like the blend I used to brew at home, a specific brand from a shop in Bakersfield that my ex-wife had introduced me to years ago. "That's," I began, "item C-247. It appeared on the desk assigned to every new employee for the past 8 years. We've tested the coffee extensively. Safe to drink, though it always matches the recipient's preferred preparation exactly." Dr. Vasquez made a note on her tablet. "Which brings us to Protocol 1. She handed me a laminated card. The text was simple, printed in standard bureaucratic font. Protocol 1. Accept gifts from unlisted sources. Document everything. Do not attempt to refuse or discard items that appear on your workspace. Consumption is permitted after initial documentation. The objects here respond to human presence in ways we don't fully understand," Dr. Vasquez explained. "Some items become agitated when ignored. Others," she pointed toward a shelf where a music box sat open, its tiny ballerina frozen mid-spin. "That belonged to a collector in Phoenix. It plays different songs depending on who's listening. For you, it might play something from your childhood. For me, it tends toward classical pieces my grandmother hummed while cooking." I approached the music box, noting how the ballerina's painted face seemed to track my movement. The mechanism looked handcrafted, possibly early 1900s, with intricate engravings around the base. As I leaned closer, the tiny figure began rotating slowly, and a melody drifted from the box. Not the typical plinky tune of most music boxes, but a full orchestral arrangement that shouldn't have been possible from such a small device. The song was "The Long and Winding Road" by the Beatles. Danny used to play it on his guitar during family gatherings, always slightly off-key, but with enough enthusiasm to make everyone smile. I hadn't heard it since his funeral. If you like the stories, please hype the videos from a button like this just above the comment section. It helps the videos to get more reach and perform well. It would take just a few seconds and cost nothing, but would help the channel grow even faster. Thank you. "How does it know?" I asked, stepping back from the music box. The melody continued, but softer now, as if responding to the distance. "We have theories. Psychic resonance, quantum entanglement with memory centers, localized temporal displacement that allows access to past experiences." Dr. Vasquez shrugged. "None of them explain why a mechanical music box can access specific emotional memories from observers. It's never encountered." I pulled out the clipboard and started writing. Date, time, object designation, observed behavior. The familiar routine of documentation helped steady my hands. Teaching had trained me to observe and record, even when dealing with students whose behavior made no logical sense. "Protocol 2, Dr. Vasquez continued, handing me another card. Never work alone in storage level C after 10 p.m. If you find yourself here after hours, contact security immediately and wait for escort to upper levels. What happens after 10 p.m.? Items become more active during overnight hours. We've had employees report objects moving between shelves, photographs showing different images, mirrors reflecting rooms that don't match their actual surroundings. She checked her watch. You'll work day shifts for now. Night duties require additional clearance and specialized training. The music box fell silent as we moved deeper into the storage area. I documented everything: temperature readings, atmospheric pressure, the way certain items seemed to hum with barely audible frequencies. By lunch break, I'd filled 12 pages with observations that would have sounded like science fiction 3 weeks ago. But Danny's death had prepared me for accepting things that defied explanation. Water didn't grab people and pull them under. Music boxes didn't play personalized songs. Government facilities didn't hire high school teachers to catalog supernatural objects. Yet here I was, documenting the exact temperature fluctuation around a mirror that showed reflections of rooms I'd never seen. My second week began with Dr. Vasquez introducing me to the photography collection. 43 framed pictures lined the eastern wall of storage level C, each one displaying scenes that shifted when viewed from different angles. The frames themselves appeared ordinary, standard metal borders you might find at any department store. But the images they contained defied every principle of static photography I understood. Items C891 through C933, Dr. Vasquez explained, stopping before a photograph of what appeared to be a suburban kitchen, confiscated from an estate sale in Reno. The previous owner's family reported that pictures throughout the house began showing rooms from their childhood homes, vacation destinations they'd never visited, and occasionally, places that seemed to exist nowhere on Earth. I studied the kitchen photo closely. Oak cabinets, checkered linoleum flooring, a window above the sink showing a backyard with mature elm trees. Standard 1980s decor, nothing particularly unusual. Then I stepped to my left, and the scene changed. The same kitchen, but now someone stood at the stove, a woman in a floral dress, her back turned toward the camera. She stirred something in a pot, steam rising from whatever she was cooking. The figures in these photographs don't interact with observers, Dr. Vasquez noted, watching me document the change. They continue their activities regardless of who's watching. We've never recorded the same person appearing twice, and facial recognition software finds no matches in any database. I moved to my right, returning to my original position. The woman had vanished, leaving only the empty kitchen, but now a coffee mug sat on the counter that hadn't been there moments before, still steaming as if someone had just poured it. Protocol 3. Dr. Vasquez handed me the next card. Document all photographic changes with timestamp and viewing angle. Never attempt to photograph the photographs themselves with external cameras. Previous attempts resulted in equipment malfunctions and staff psychological evaluations. What kind of malfunctions? I ask, adjusting my position to test different viewing angles. From the far right, the kitchen showed broken dishes scattered across the floor, as if someone had swept everything off the counters in anger. Digital cameras display static. Film cameras produce images of whoever was operating them, but taken from angles that should have been physically impossible. Overhead shots, through walls, from positions that suggest the photographer was being watched while they worked. Dr. Vasquez made notes on her tablet. The psychological evaluations revealed that staff members who attempted unauthorized photography reported vivid dreams about the locations shown in the pictures, often lasting for weeks after exposure. I spent the morning cataloging changes across the entire photography collection. A beach scene that showed different weather patterns depending on viewing angle. A city street that displayed the same intersection during various time periods. sometimes busy with modern traffic, other times empty, except for horse-drawn carriages. A forest clearing where the seasonal changes cycled through spring, summer, autumn, and winter as I moved along the wall. The most disturbing photograph hung at the collection's end. It showed a hospital room with an empty bed, white sheets pulled tight across the mattress. The viewing angle didn't change the basic scene, but small details shifted constantly. Sometimes flowers appeared on the bedside table. Occasionally, medical equipment materialized, an IV stand, monitoring devices, a wheelchair positioned beside the window. When I viewed it from the leftmost position, a figure lay in the bed. The person was always different, sometimes elderly, sometimes young, male or female, but consistently appearing unconscious or sleeping. What made this particular image troubling was how many of the figures resembled people I knew, former colleagues from the school district, neighbors from my old apartment complex, even Danny lying motionless beneath hospital blankets with his eyes closed. "That one requires special documentation," Dr. Vasquez said, appearing beside me. "Record the identity of anyone you recognize, but don't share those observations with other staff members. We've discovered that discussing recognized figures increases the frequency of their appearances." By afternoon, she introduced me to the mirror collection. 7 antique mirrors, each one reflecting something other than the room they occupied. Unlike the photographs, these reflections moved in real time, showing active scenes from locations that our research team hadn't been able to identify or verify. "Protocol 4, Dr. Vasquez explained, positioning herself carefully to avoid direct sightlines with any of the mirror surfaces. "Never make eye contact with figures in the reflections. Observe peripheral activity only. If a reflected figure attempts to communicate with you, leave the area immediately and file an incident report." The first mirror showed a library I didn't recognize. Tall wooden shelves, leather-bound books, reading tables occupied by people in clothing from various historical periods. A woman in 1940s attire sat at one table, writing letters by hand. At another table, a man in modern business clothes typed on a laptop computer that definitely hadn't existed when the woman's outfit was fashionable. "Time displacement theory," Dr. Vasquez noted, following my observations. "The mirrors may be showing the same locations across different temporal periods, or they might display parallel dimensions where historical progression followed alternative patterns." I documented everything carefully, avoiding direct eye contact with the reflected figures while noting their activities. The library patrons appeared absorbed in their work, occasionally looking up to scan the shelves or check reference materials, but never seeming to notice they were being observed from outside their reality. The second mirror displayed what appeared to be a modern office building, but the activities inside made no logical sense. People moved through cubicles in straight lines, turning at perfect 90-degree angles, sitting at desks for exactly the same duration before standing and walking the identical path to a different workstation. Their movements were too synchronized, too precise. Like actors following choreography they'd rehearsed thousands of times. "We've been monitoring that particular reflection for 6 months, Dr. Vasquez said. "The figures repeat the same pattern every day. Same movements, same timing, same sequence of activities. We haven't observed any variation in their routine." The third mirror showed a playground at night, empty swings moving in wind that didn't affect the surrounding trees. Occasionally, a child would appear on one of the swings, pumping their legs to gain momentum before vanishing mid-arc, leaving the swing to gradually slow to a stop. I was documenting the swing patterns when movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. In the fourth mirror, someone was waving, not at the scene within the reflection, but directly toward the mirror's surface, toward me. "Dr. Vasquez," I said. stepping back from the mirror collection. She looked up from her tablet, then followed my gaze toward the fourth mirror. The figure was still there, still waving, still making direct eye contact with something on our side of the reflection. "Incident report," she said calmly, already moving toward the exit. "We'll discuss Protocol 5 tomorrow." As we walked toward the elevator, I could feel the figure in the mirror watching us leave. They never stopped waving. The incident report took me 40 minutes to complete. Dr. Vasquez had provided a template with specific fields, object designation, time of contact, nature of interaction, emotional response, and recommended follow-up actions. The form felt clinical, designed to reduce extraordinary events to data points that could be filed and analyzed. The figure maintained eye contact for approximately 30 seconds, I wrote. Appeared to be male, mid-30s, wearing what looked like a blue work shirt. Waving motion was consistent and directed specifically toward my position. Dr. Vasquez reviewed my report the next morning, making notes in the margins with a red pen. She'd changed her usual business attire for something more practical: khaki pants, a polo shirt with the facility's solar research logo, and comfortable walking shoes that suggested we'd be covering more ground than usual. "Protocol 5, she said, leading me through a security door I hadn't seen before. Never respond to direct contact from reflected figures. No waving back, no verbal acknowledgement, no gestures of any kind. Interaction attempts create what we call bridges, connections between our reality and whatever dimension these mirrors access. The new area beyond the security door felt different from storage level C. The air was warmer, with a humidity that reminded me of summers in the Central Valley. Emergency lighting cast everything in amber tones, and the concrete walls showed water stains despite the facility's desert location. "Sub-level D," Dr. Vasquez explained, checking her keycard against a reader beside another door. "Objects here require higher security clearance because they demonstrate active awareness of observers. Everything you've seen so far has been reactive, responding to human presence, but not initiating contact." She paused at the threshold, turning to face me directly. "The items in sub-level D seek interaction. They want to communicate, to form connections, to draw people into their sphere of influence. Protocol 5 exists because we've lost 3 researchers who thought they could establish safe communication with entities that exist outside our normal reality." The first room contained a single object on a pedestal, an antique telephone with a rotary dial and a receiver made from heavy black plastic. The cord disappeared into the base without connecting to any visible network. A small placard identified it as Item D112, confiscated from a house in Carson City, where the previous owner claimed it would ring with calls from deceased relatives. "Dr. Rebecca Hoffman tried answering it 18 months ago," Dr. Vasquez said, maintaining distance from the telephone. "She spoke with someone claiming to be her father, who had died in a car accident when she was 12. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. Security footage shows her side of the discussion, but no audio recording captured any voices from the phone itself." I studied the telephone carefully, noting how its surface reflected light in ways that seemed inconsistent with the room's illumination. The receiver appeared to be hovering slightly above its cradle, though from certain angles it looked properly seated. "What happened to Dr. Hoffman?" "She returned to work the next day, but claimed her father called her at home that evening on her cell phone, then again the following night on her landline. Within a week, she was receiving calls on numbers that didn't belong to her, phones in hotel rooms, payphones she happened to be walking past, even the facility's main reception line." Dr. Vasquez made notes on her tablet. "She took medical leave after reporting that every phone call, regardless of the number, connected her to the same voice claiming to be her deceased father. The telephone began to ring. The sound was nothing like modern phone rings, a harsh mechanical clanging that seemed to emanate from the device's internal components rather than an electronic tone. Each ring lasted exactly 3 seconds with 2-second intervals between them. "Document, but don't approach," Dr. Vasquez said, stepping further back. "It rings approximately once per week, usually when new staff members are present. We've never determined what triggers the behavior." I wrote down the time, duration, and interval pattern, while the telephone continued its summons. After 12 rings, it fell silent, but the receiver now hung at an angle that definitely hadn't been there moments before. The next room housed what appeared to be children's toys, though none of them looked like any toys I'd seen in modern stores. A wooden rocking horse sat in the center, its paint faded and cracked with age. Dolls lined shelves along the walls, porcelain faces with glass eyes that tracked movement with subtle precision. A toy piano sat in one corner, its keys occasionally depressing without anyone touching them, producing single notes in no recognizable pattern. "Item D-203 through D-267, Dr. Vasquez said, gesturing toward the collection. "Estate sale in Sparks, Nevada. The family reported that these toys would operate independently, always during overnight hours when children in the house were supposed to be sleeping." I approached the rocking horse, noting how its runners moved in tiny increments, even though the floor was level and still. The motion was barely perceptible, but consistent, a gentle forward and backward sway that continued regardless of air circulation or building vibrations. The children in the house began talking about playmates they couldn't see, Dr. Vasquez continued. Invisible friends who would suggest games that became increasingly dangerous. Hide and seek in traffic. Swimming in irrigation canals. Climbing onto the roof to look for buried treasure. One of the dolls turned its head toward me as I documented the rocking horse's movement. The motion was smooth, controlled, and definitely intentional. Glass eyes that had been staring at the wall now focused directly on my face with an expression that seemed far too aware for a manufactured toy. Protocol 6, Dr. Vasquez handed me the final card. "If toys demonstrate directed behavior toward staff members, maintain observation distance, and complete documentation quickly. Extended exposure to active toys has resulted in staff reporting auditory hallucinations, children's voices calling their names, requests for playtime, invitations to participate in games that exist only in imagination." I finished documenting the doll's head movement and moved toward the toy piano. As I approached, it began playing the melody I recognized. "Mary Had a Little Lamb," but in a minor key that transformed the simple children's song into something that sounded like a funeral dirge. "The piano responds to proximity," Dr. Vasquez noted. "Different melodies for different observers. Usually children's songs, but modified in ways that remove any sense of innocence or joy." Hi everyone. Before we move forward, I have something exciting to tell you. Many of you asked for stories without the strange rules, so I created a brand new channel just for that. It's called Mr. Grimm Archive. The link is in the description, or you can click the card above. I think you'll really enjoy it. So check it out whenever you want some more exciting types of stories. Also, I hope you're enjoying the 2 uploads a day. Let me know in the comments if you like some stories from your location. Now, let's continue with today's story. The doll that had turned toward me was now facing a different direction, looking toward the piano, as if listening to the music. When I glanced back at the rocking horse, it had moved closer to my position. Not dramatically, but enough that I was certain it hadn't been that close when we'd entered the room. "How many people have we lost to protocol violations?" I asked, stepping back toward the door. 3 confirmed disappearances, 7 medical leaves for psychological evaluation, 12 transfers to other departments after reporting persistent paranormal experiences in their personal lives. Dr. Vasquez checked her watch, which is why tomorrow we're implementing additional safety measures for your access to sublevel D. As we walked back toward the elevator, I could hear the toy piano continuing its distorted melody. The sound followed us down the corridor, growing softer, but never quite fading completely. Even after the elevator doors closed and we began ascending to storage level C, I could still hear faint musical notes echoing in the space between floors. That night, lying in my apartment in Henderson, I woke to the sound of "Mary Had a Little Lamb" being played on what sounded like a toy piano somewhere in my building. The melody drifted through the walls in the same minor key I'd heard earlier, but when I checked the hallway, I found only silence and empty corridors. The music continued until dawn, always just quiet enough that I couldn't pinpoint its source. My 3rd week started with a personnel change. Dr. Vasquez informed me that I'd be working with a partner, Jake Whitmore, a former crime scene photographer from Las Vegas Metro, who'd been transferred to the facility after photographing evidence that couldn't be explained through conventional forensics. Jake specializes in documentation techniques for objects that resist standard recording methods, Dr. Vasquez explained as we waited by the elevator. His experience with anomalous visual phenomena makes him ideal for training new researchers in advanced observation protocols. Jake appeared exactly on time, carrying a camera bag that looked like it had survived several war zones. He was younger than me, probably early 30s, with the kind of focused intensity that comes from years of photographing crime scenes where details matter more than comfort. His handshake was firm, and he met my eyes directly when speaking, a habit that would become problematic in our line of work. Anderson, right? High school teacher turned government researcher. He adjusted his camera strap. Dr. Vasquez says you're adapting well to the documentation requirements. That's good. Most people struggle with accepting that normal rules don't apply down here. We descended to storage level C, where Jake immediately began examining my previous work logs. He flipped through pages of observations, nodding occasionally at specific entries, making notes in margins with a pencil that he kept perfectly sharpened. "Your documentation style is solid," he said, reaching the entries about the mirror collection. "But you're missing temporal data. These objects operate on schedules we don't fully understand. Time of day affects behavior patterns. Atmospheric pressure changes how they respond to observers. Even the phase of the moon influences some items." Jake led me to a section of storage level C I hadn't seen before, a climate-controlled chamber containing objects that required specific environmental conditions. The temperature was kept at exactly 68 degrees, with humidity levels monitored by digital sensors that logged data every 30 seconds. "Item C-445, Jake said, stopping before a grandfather clock that stood against the far wall. Confiscated from an antique shop in Boulder City. The previous owner reported that it would chime at times that didn't match any standard clock system, sometimes 13 times at midnight, occasionally chiming every few minutes for hours, then remaining silent for days. The clock's pendulum swung steadily, but I noticed that its rhythm didn't match the second hand on my watch. Sometimes the pendulum moved faster, sometimes slower, as if operating according to temporal rules that existed independent of normal time measurement. "Here's what makes this interesting," Jake continued, checking his camera settings. "The clock chimes correspond to significant events in the lives of people who spend extended time near it. Dr. Martinez documented 17 chimes the day before her mother's funeral. Thompson heard 24 chimes the morning his wife went into labor. I studied the clock's face, noting how the hands pointed to different times depending on viewing angle. From my position, it showed 3:47. When I moved 3 feet to the left, the hands indicated 11:23. Jake observed from the right side and reported seeing 8:15. Each observer sees different times, Jake explained, taking photographs with a camera that had been modified with filters and lenses I didn't recognize. But the chimes happened simultaneously for everyone in the room. We theorized that the clock displays personally significant times, moments of importance from each observer's past or future. As if responding to our discussion, the clock began chiming. Deep, resonant tones that seemed to come from within the mechanism itself, rather than from any visible bell or chime system. I counted each chime carefully. 1, 2, 3, continuing until it reached 15. 15 chimes, Jake noted, writing in his observation log. That's unusual. Most documented sequences fall between 7 and 24. 15 suggests something significant happening either today or in the near future. The clock's pendulum stopped swinging after the final chime. The silence that followed felt heavier than normal quiet, as if sound itself had been absorbed by the mechanism and wouldn't return until the clock decided to release it. We moved to another section where Jake introduced me to objects that demonstrated temporal displacement properties. A music box that played songs from decades it shouldn't have been able to access. A radio that received broadcasts from stations that had gone off the air years ago. A television that showed programs from the 1950s, complete with original commercial advertising for products that no longer existed. The key to working with temporal anomalies, Jake explained, adjusting the radio's frequency dial, is understanding that cause and effect don't always follow linear progression here. Sometimes documentation appears in our logs before we actually observe the events being documented. He showed me his camera's memory card, scrolling through digital files that included photographs I was certain he hadn't taken during our time together. Images of me examining objects we hadn't visited yet. Close-up shots of my hands writing observation notes for items we hadn't encountered. Precognition or temporal echo, Jake said, noting my confusion. The camera occasionally captures events before they happen. We've learned to treat these images as preview documentation. They help us prepare for what we're about to observe. According to the precognition photographs, we were supposed to visit sub-level D next, where I would encounter something that would require immediate evacuation procedures. The images showed me running toward an emergency exit, while Jake spoke rapidly into a radio communicator. These photos suggest we should modify today's schedule, Jake said, reviewing the timestamp data. Precognition images typically manifest between 30 minutes and 6 hours before the documented events occur. We returned to storage level C, where Jake decided to focus on objects with more predictable behavior patterns. He taught me advanced documentation techniques, how to photograph reflective surfaces without triggering defensive responses, methods for recording audio from objects that produce sounds beyond normal hearing ranges, procedures for measuring temperature fluctuations that indicated supernatural activity. The most important skill, Jake said, demonstrating proper distance measurements with a laser device, is learning to trust the protocols completely. Every researcher who's been injured or lost was someone who thought they could improve on established procedures. During lunch break, Jake shared stories about previous researchers who had violated protocols. Dr. Hoffman wasn't the only one who'd tried communicating with entities through the telephone system. A researcher named Williams had attempted to enter one of the mirror reflections physically by pressing his hand against the surface. The mirror had accepted his hand up to the wrist before something on the other side grabbed hold and began pulling. It took 4 security guards to extract him, Jake said, eating a sandwich that had appeared on his desk that morning. Another example of item C247's gift-giving behavior. William spent 3 weeks in medical evaluation reporting that he could still feel something holding his hand, even after his physical extraction from the mirror. As afternoon approached, Jake's camera captured several more precognition images. These showed both of us in sublevel D, but the images were darker, more chaotic than the earlier photographs. In one image, Jake was speaking into his radio while pointing towards something outside the camera's frame. In another, I was backing away from an object with my hands raised in what appeared to be a defensive gesture. "The timeline is accelerating," Jake noted, checking the image timestamps. "These events are now predicted to occur within the next 2 hours, instead of later today." At 3:47 p.m., the exact time I'd seen on the grandfather clock earlier, emergency alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Dr. Vasquez's voice came through the intercom system, announcing immediate evacuation procedures for all personnel in storage level C and sub-level D. Jake grabbed his camera equipment and headed for the emergency exit. "Temporal paradox," he called over the alarm sounds. The precognition photographs didn't predict future events, they created them. As we evacuated, I realized that the grandfather clock's 15 chimes hadn't been announcing something significant in our futures. They had been counting down to this moment, when our documentation of tomorrow's events would force today's reality to match tomorrow's photographs. The evacuation lasted 3 hours. Jake and I sat in the facility's surface-level break room, drinking vending machine coffee while security teams swept every sub-level with equipment I'd never seen before. Through the windows, I could see personnel in hazmat suits carrying devices that looked like metal detectors crossed with Geiger counters, scanning the air itself for whatever had triggered the emergency protocols. "Temporal cascade failure," Dr. Vasquez explained when she finally joined us. Her usually pristine appearance had been replaced by rumpled clothes and exhaustion lines around her eyes. The precognition photographs created a feedback loop. Jake's camera documented events that hadn't happened yet, which forced reality to accommodate those future images, which created new temporal disruptions that required additional documentation. Jake reviewed the photographs on his camera's display screen, scrolling through images that now showed events from our evacuation. Pictures of us sitting in this exact break room, drinking coffee from these same vending machine cups, having this conversation with Dr. Vasquez. The timestamps indicated these photos had been captured 6 hours ago. "The camera's temporal sensitivity has increased," Jake noted, showing us an image of himself taking a photograph of the camera's display screen showing photographs. "We're looking at recursive temporal documentation, the camera photographing itself, photographing future events that include it, photographing future events." Dr. Vasquez rubbed her temples like someone fighting a migraine. "This is why we have protocols. The moment researchers start treating these objects like scientific instruments instead of contained anomalies, the anomalies begin affecting reality beyond their designated storage areas." She led us to a conference room I hadn't seen before, where wall-mounted monitors displayed live feeds from security cameras throughout the facility. Storage level C appeared normal. Objects sitting on their designated shelves, environmental controls maintaining proper temperature and humidity. But sub-level D showed something different. "Camera 23D," Dr. Vasquez said, pointing to a monitor that displayed the room with the antique telephone. "Watch the timestamp." I studied the digital display in the corner of the screen. The timestamp jumped backward by 17 minutes, then forward by 31 minutes, then backward again by 8 minutes. The temporal flow in sub-level D had become completely unstable. "The telephone is ringing constantly now," Dr. Vasquez continued, switching to camera feeds from other rooms in sub-level D. "The toys are all active simultaneously. Every mirror is showing different reflections every few seconds. And worst of all, the containment barriers between storage areas are beginning to break down. On camera 27D, I could see the children's toys had organized themselves into formations that resembled playground activities. The rocking horse moved in large arcs. The dolls sat in circles facing each other, and the toy piano played complex melodies that required more keys than the instrument actually possessed. "We need to understand what triggered the cascade," Dr. Vasquez said, turning to face Jake and me directly. "Both of you were following established protocols. Your documentation methods were correct. The temporal displacement should have remained contained within the camera's memory system." Jake set his camera on the conference table and began reviewing his equipment settings. "I used standard filters for temporal anomaly documentation, polarizing lens to reduce reflection interference, UV filter to block spectrum contamination. Nothing different from previous assignments. I thought about our morning routine, trying to identify any deviation from normal procedures. We'd followed Protocol 5 during mirror observations. We'd maintained proper distance from reactive objects. We'd documented everything according to established guidelines." "The grandfather clock," I said suddenly. "It chimed 15 times when we discussed temporal displacement. You said most documented sequences fall between 7 and 24 chimes. 15 was unusual." Dr. Vasquez pulled up digital files on a tablet, scrolling through months of clock observation logs. 15 chimes have been documented only 3 times in the past year. Each occurrence preceded significant temporal anomalies in other parts of the facility. She showed us the correlation data. The first 15-chime event had preceded Dr. Hoffman's telephone communication with her deceased father. The second had occurred the day before Williams attempted to enter the mirror reflection. The third had happened this morning, exactly 6 hours before Jake's camera began capturing recursive temporal photographs. "The clock isn't responding to significant events," Jake realized, studying the correlation patterns. "It's announcing when temporal stability is about to collapse." "It's a warning system." Dr. Vasquez nodded grimly, "which means we've been misinterpreting its function for months. We thought it was predicting personal events for individual observers. Actually, it's been measuring temporal stress throughout the entire facility." She switched the monitors to display different areas of the facility. The correlation became clear once we knew what to look for. In storage level C, several objects were demonstrating increased activity. The music box was playing songs continuously, instead of responding only to observer proximity. The photographs were cycling through their various scenes rapidly, showing multiple time periods within single viewing angles. Even the coffee thermos on my desk was producing different beverages every few minutes. Coffee, tea, hot chocolate, drinks I didn't recognize. "We have approximately 6 hours before the temporal cascade reaches the surface levels," Dr. Vasquez explained. "After that, the anomalies will begin affecting the surrounding area. Henderson, Nevada will experience temporal displacement events. Local residents will encounter objects and people from different time periods. Reality will become unstable across a 20-mile radius." Jake was already assembling his equipment. "What's the containment procedure?" "Manual reset of all temporal anomalies. We need to return every object to its baseline state before the cascade spreads beyond the facility." Dr. Vasquez handed us modified communication devices that looked like walkie-talkies combined with digital cameras. "These have been shielded against temporal interference. Document everything, but don't attempt any direct intervention with objects showing active temporal displacement." We descended to storage level C wearing protective gear that included sensors designed to detect temporal field fluctuations. The elevator ride took different amounts of time each trip, sometimes 30 seconds, sometimes 2 minutes. sometimes seeming to move between floors that shouldn't have existed. The storage area had transformed since our evacuation. Objects had moved from their designated positions, rearranging themselves into configurations that followed no logical organizational system. The music box sat beside the grandfather clock, both instruments producing synchronized melodies that created harmony despite being designed decades apart. The photography collection had expanded. New pictures appeared on the wall between existing frames, showing scenes that flickered between different time periods every few seconds. "Start with the least active items," Jake instructed, documenting everything with his modified camera. "Build toward the major temporal sources gradually." I approached the coffee thermos on my desk, which was now producing a steady stream of different beverages. Each cup I poured contained something different. Sometimes coffee from the Bakersfield shop I'd remembered, sometimes drinks I'd never tasted, occasionally liquids that didn't seem to follow normal physics as they poured. Item C247 temporal displacement confirmed, I reported into the communication device, beverage production cycling through multiple timeline variants, attempting baseline documentation. As I wrote observation notes, the thermos gradually slowed its cycling pattern. The beverages stabilized into consistent coffee production, though still matching my preferred preparation exactly. The temporal field sensors showed decreasing fluctuation levels around my workstation. Documentation appears to stabilize temporal displacement, I reported to Jake, who was working with the photography collection. Detailed observation notes may be acting as anchor points for anomalous objects. Jake confirmed similar results with the photographs. As he documented their rapid scene changes, the images began settling into their normal viewing angle dependent display patterns. The new pictures that had appeared between existing frames faded away, leaving only the original 43 documented items. We worked systematically through storage level C, using detailed documentation to restore normal temporal behavior to each object. The process was exhausting. Every observation had to be precise, every measurement recorded accurately, every behavioral change noted with timestamp and environmental context. By late afternoon, we'd restored baseline conditions to most of storage level C. The grandfather clock had stopped its erratic timekeeping and returned to displaying different times for different observers. The music box responded only to proximity rather than playing continuously. The mirrors showed consistent reflections instead of rapidly cycling through different dimensions. But as we prepared to tackle Sublevel D, Jake's camera captured one final precognition photograph. The image showed both of us in the telephone room, but we weren't alone. A figure stood beside the antique telephone, the same person who had been waving from the fourth mirror, now somehow present in our reality instead of existing only in reflection. The temporal cascade created a bridge, Jake said, studying the photograph's timestamp. This image was captured 15 minutes from now. Whatever's happening in Sublevel D, we're about to encounter something that crossed over from the mirror dimension. Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled through our communication devices. Emergency situation developing in Sublevel D. The mirror collection is showing identical reflections in all 7 units. Something is preparing to transition from reflected reality into our dimension. You have authorization to evacuate immediately. Jake shouldered his camera equipment. Or we can try to contain it before it reaches the surface. The decision was mine to make. Follow protocol and evacuate, or risk everything to prevent whatever was in those mirrors from escaping into our world. I thought about Danny's face disappearing beneath water that moved like it had intentions. How I'd stood helpless on the riverbank, watching something that shouldn't exist take my brother away while I convinced myself it was just a flash flood. How I'd spent weeks filing reports that no one believed, searching for explanations that didn't exist in any textbook. "We stay," I told Jake, adjusting my temporal field sensor. "If this thing reaches the surface, it won't just affect Henderson. These anomalies spread. Eventually, someone else loses a brother to something that shouldn't be possible." Jake nodded, checking his camera equipment one final time. "Dr. Vasquez, we're proceeding to sublevel D for containment attempt. Maintain surface-level evacuation protocols, but keep communication channels open." Her response crackled through static that suggested the temporal disruptions were affecting electronic systems. "Understood. Emergency containment team, standing by. You have 20 minutes before mandatory evacuation." The elevator to sublevel D moved differently now. Instead of smooth descent, it lurched between floors as if unsure which level existed at any given moment. The floor indicators cycled through numbers that didn't correspond to the facility's actual architecture. B1, B7, B3, B12, B4. When the doors finally opened, we stepped into a corridor that stretched longer than it had during previous visits. "Environmental changes confirm dimensional instability," Jake reported, photographing the extended hallway. "Architecture is adapting to accommodate whatever's crossing over from the mirror dimension." We approached the telephone room first, following the route indicated by Jake's precognition photograph. The antique phone was ringing constantly now, its mechanical clanging echoing through corridors that seemed designed to amplify sound beyond normal acoustic principles. Each ring lasted exactly 3 seconds, but the intervals between rings varied, sometimes 2 seconds, sometimes 8, occasionally overlapping so that multiple ring cycles occurred simultaneously. "Item D-112, temporal displacement critical," I documented, noting how the phone's cord now extended across the floor toward the hallway, despite having been contained within its base mechanism during previous observations. Physical boundaries no longer constraining anomalous object behavior. Jake set up his camera equipment to capture whatever was about to manifest. According to his precognition photograph, the figure from the mirrors would appear within the next few minutes, but the exact nature of its arrival remained unclear. "The mirrors," Jake said, pointing toward the end of the corridor where amber emergency lighting reflected off surfaces that shouldn't have been visible from our position. 7 reflective surfaces, showing identical scenes instead of their normal, varied dimensions. We moved toward the mirror collection, maintaining protocol distances despite the emergency situation. All 7 mirrors now displayed the same reflection, a room that looked exactly like the space we occupied, but populated by figures who moved through our environment, as if they belonged there. In the reflection, I could see myself and Jake approaching the mirrors, but we weren't alone. The figure who had been waving from the 4th mirror now stood beside us, pointing towards something outside the reflection's frame. Other figures occupied the reflected space, people in various clothing styles from different historical periods, all moving through the same room, but apparently existing in different temporal layers. "Mirror dimension showing convergence event," Jake documented, taking photographs that would later provide crucial evidence for researchers studying dimensional breach incidents. Multiple timeline variants occupying shared space. The reflection showed the waving figure stepping toward the mirror's surface from the inside. As he approached the reflective boundary, the glass began rippling like water, creating concentric circles that spread outward from the point of contact. "He's coming through," I said, backing away from the mirror collection while maintaining visual contact with the emerging figure. The process wasn't violent or dramatic. The figure simply walked through the mirror's surface as if stepping through a doorway, bringing with him a pocket of altered reality that made the air around him shimmer with heat distortion effects. He appeared solid, 3-dimensional, completely present in our reality, but wrong in ways that my physics background couldn't adequately explain. Documentation suggests friendly intentions, Jake noted, referring to his precognition photographs. Figure maintains non-threatening posture, attempts communication rather than aggressive behavior. The figure raised his hand in the same waving gesture I'd observed through the mirror, but now he spoke. Words that came from multiple directions simultaneously, as if his voice existed in several locations at once. "Marcus Anderson," he said, and hearing my name spoken by something that had emerged from another dimension created a disorientation that made the room feel unstable. "Danny Anderson's brother. You've been documenting our reality for 3 weeks." "Who are you?" I asked, maintaining protocol distance while Jake continued photographing the interaction. "Dr. James Martinez. I was a researcher here until 18 months ago." The figure smiled, and the expression looked exactly like a normal human smile, except that it appeared on his face from multiple angles simultaneously. I tried to establish communication with mirror entities. The attempt was successful, but not in ways anyone anticipated. Jake lowered his camera. Dr. Martinez was listed as missing in action after attempting to map dimensional coordinates through mirror observations. The official report stated he disappeared during unauthorized research. "I didn't disappear," Martinez said, his voice continuing to emanate from multiple points around the room. "I crossed over. The mirror dimension operates according to different physical laws, but it's not dangerous. It's just organized differently than your reality." He gestured toward the mirrors, which now showed scenes from our dimension, but viewed from perspectives that existed within the reflection. I could see storage level C from angles that suggested the observer was moving freely through spaces that should have been solid walls. "The temporal cascade isn't a malfunction," Martinez continued. "It's a communication attempt. The entities in mirror reality have been trying to establish contact with your research team for months. They understand that you're studying their reality, and they want to share information about dimensional stability." Jake reviewed his precognition photographs, comparing them to our current situation. The images show successful communication followed by voluntary return to mirror dimension. This suggests negotiated resolution rather than containment failure. "Dr. Vasquez," I reported through the communication device, requesting permission to establish formal communication with Dr. Martinez. Situation indicates controlled contact rather than dimensional breach. Her response took several minutes, during which Martinez waited patiently, occasionally gesturing toward the mirrors to indicate specific reflected scenes that showed different areas of our facility from mirror dimension perspectives. "Permission granted for limited communication," Dr. Vasquez finally responded. "Document everything. If the situation deteriorates, evacuate immediately." Martinez explained that the mirror dimension contained research facilities similar to ours, populated by entities who studied our reality through reflective surfaces. The recent increase in anomalous behavior had resulted from their attempts to establish formal communication between dimensional research teams. "The temporal cascade was designed to attract attention," Martinez said, showing us how to interpret the mirror reflections as communication attempts rather than threatening intrusions. "Your documentation methods create resonance patterns that we can detect from mirror reality. Detailed observation logs appear in our dimension as readable text." He demonstrated by having Jake write a simple message in his observation log. Within moments, the text appeared floating in the air within one of the mirror reflections, translated into symbols that looked like combination of mathematical equations and musical notation. "Bidirectional communication system," Jake documented, photographing the translated text. "Written documentation in our reality becomes visible information in mirror dimension." Martinez provided coordinates for establishing stable communication protocols that wouldn't trigger temporal cascades. The process involved specific positioning relative to mirror surfaces, particular documentation formats that translated clearly between dimensions, and scheduling that avoided interference with sensitive objects in both realities. The grandfather clock monitors dimensional stability for both sides, Martinez explained. 15 chimes indicate optimal conditions for safe communication. Other chime patterns warn of instability periods when contact should be avoided. After an hour of information exchange, Martinez prepared to return to mirror reality. The process was as simple as his arrival. He walked toward the nearest mirror and stepped through its surface like crossing a threshold. "Your brother," he said, pausing at the boundary between dimensions. "The river incident near Bakersfield. That was dimensional intersection, not supernatural attack. Danny crossed over during the natural portal event. He's safe in our reality, but return travel requires specific conditions that occur approximately once every 18 months. Before I could respond, Martinez had stepped completely through the mirror, leaving only normal reflections that showed our own reality from appropriate angles. Jake and I completed our documentation, noting environmental conditions that had returned to baseline stability. The temporal field sensors showed normal readings throughout sublevel D. The emergency alarms had stopped, and Dr. Vasquez's voice through the communication device confirmed that surface-level evacuation procedures were being canceled. As we prepared to return to storage level C, I stared at the mirrors, wondering if Danny could see me from wherever he existed in mirror reality, and calculating when the next 18-month cycle would provide an opportunity for contact. 3 days after the dimensional contact event, I sat in Dr. Vasquez's office reviewing modified protocols that would govern communication between our facility and mirror reality research teams. The documents looked similar to standard operating procedures, but every page contained footnotes referencing dimensional stability measurements, translation matrices for converting text between realities, and scheduling requirements based on lunar cycles and electromagnetic field variations. Dr. Martinez provided comprehensive guidelines for safe interaction, Dr. Vasquez explained, highlighting specific sections with a yellow marker. The mirror entities have been monitoring our research methods for months. They understand our documentation systems better than we initially realized. Jake spread his precognition photographs across the conference table, arranging them in chronological order according to their timestamp data. The images now told a complete story. Our arrival at the mirror collection, Martinez's emergence from dimensional reality, the successful communication exchange, and his voluntary return to mirror dimension. Temporal photography functions differently when both dimensions are actively cooperating, Jake noted, pointing to subtle details in each image. The camera captured actual future events rather than probability variance. This suggests that communication between realities creates temporal stability instead of disrupting it. I studied the new protocols, focusing on sections that outline procedures for personal communication between family members, separated by dimensional boundaries. Martinez had provided specific instructions for reaching individuals who had crossed over during portal events, but the process required months of preparation and precise timing. The next optimal communication window occurs in 17 months and 12 days, Dr. Vasquez said, consulting a calendar that had been marked with dates corresponding to dimensional portal cycles. Environmental conditions need to align with lunar phases, solar activity levels, and facility-wide temporal stability measurements. "What do I need to do to prepare?" I asked, noting how my hands remained steady as I wrote. No trembling, no anxiety symptoms. For the first time since Danny's disappearance, I felt like I was working toward a solution instead of simply documenting an unsolvable tragedy. Continue regular documentation duties, but with expanded focus on dimensional communication techniques, Dr. Vasquez replied. Jake will train you in advanced mirror observation methods. We're also implementing weekly communication sessions with mirror reality research teams to establish routine contact protocols. Jake had already begun modifying his camera equipment for dimensional photography. The new setup included filters that could capture reflected images from multiple dimensional layers simultaneously, allowing him to document how our reality appeared to observers in mirror dimension. Mirror entities see our world differently than we experience it, Jake explained, demonstrating the modified camera's capabilities. Time flows at variable rates for them. Spatial relationships follow different geometric principles. What appears solid to us might be transparent to them, and vice versa. We returned to Sublevel D, where the mirror collection had been reorganized according to Martinez's recommendations. Instead of random placement, the 7 mirrors now formed a configuration that facilitated communication between dimensions while maintaining safety protocols for researchers. 3 days after the dimensional contact event, I sat in Dr. Vasquez's office reviewing modified protocols that would govern communication between our facility and mirror reality research teams. The documents looked similar to standard operating procedures, but every page contained footnotes referencing dimensional stability measurements, translation matrices for converting text between realities, and scheduling requirements based on lunar cycles and electromagnetic field variations. Dr. Martinez provided comprehensive guidelines for safe interaction. Dr. Vasquez explained, highlighting specific sections with a yellow marker. The mirror entities have been monitoring our research methods for months. They understand our documentation systems better than we initially realized. Jake spread his precognition photographs across the conference table, arranging them in chronological order according to their timestamp data. The images now told a complete story. Our arrival at the mirror collection, Martinez's emergence from dimensional reality, the successful communication exchange, and his voluntary return to mirror dimension. Temporal photography functions differently when both dimensions are actively cooperating, Jake noted, pointing to subtle details in each image. The camera captured actual future events rather than probability variance. This suggests that communication between realities creates temporal stability instead of disrupting it. I studied the new protocols, focusing on sections that outline procedures for personal communication between family members, separated by dimensional boundaries. Martinez had provided specific instructions for reaching individuals who had crossed over during portal events, but the process required months of preparation and precise timing. The next optimal communication window occurs in 17 months and 12 days, Dr. Vasquez said, consulting a calendar that had been marked with dates corresponding to dimensional portal cycles. Environmental conditions need to align with lunar phases, solar activity levels, and facility-wide temporal stability measurements. What do I need to do to prepare? I asked, noting how my hands remained steady as I wrote. No trembling, no anxiety symptoms. For the first time since Danny's disappearance, I felt like I was working toward a solution instead of simply documenting an unsolvable tragedy. Continue regular documentation duties, but with expanded focus on dimensional communication techniques, Dr. Vasquez replied. Jake will train you in advanced mirror observation methods. We're also implementing weekly communication sessions with mirror reality research teams to establish routine contact protocols. Jake had already begun modifying his camera equipment for dimensional photography. The new setup included filters that could capture reflected images from multiple dimensional layers simultaneously, allowing him to document how our reality appeared to observers in mirror dimension. Mirror entities see our world differently than we experience it, Jake explained, demonstrating the modified camera's capabilities. Time flows at variable rates for them. Spatial relationships follow different geometric principles. What appears solid to us might be transparent to them, and vice versa. We returned to Sublevel D, where the mirror collection had been reorganized according to Martinez's recommendations. Instead of random placement, the 7 mirrors now formed a configuration that facilitated communication between dimensions while maintaining safety protocols for researchers. "Your brother's crossing wasn't accidental," Dr. Vasquez said, showing me geological survey data from the Kern River region. "Portal events in that area follow predictable patterns. Danny was fishing in the exact location where dimensional boundaries become permeable during portal cycles. On the morning of our first scheduled communication session, I arrived at Sublevel D carrying copies of the letters I'd written, observation logs from my 3 weeks of facility work, and a photograph of Danny from our last camping trip together. Jake had prepared his modified camera equipment. Dr. Vasquez brought communication coordination protocols, and together we approached Near 7 at precisely 0800 hours. The reflection showed an office environment similar to Dr. Vasquez's workspace, but populated by people who moved through the space according to different physical principles. Dr. Martinez appeared in the reflection at exactly the scheduled time, carrying what appeared to be dimensional translation equipment. Communication Session 1 initiated. I reported into the facility's recording system. Dr. Martinez visible in Mirror 7 reflection. Audio contact anticipated through item D, 112 in 30 seconds. The antique telephone began ringing at exactly 830. I lifted the receiver, noting how the weight felt different. Lighter, as if the plastic had been replaced with material that existed partially in both dimensions. "Anderson." Dr. Martinez's voice came through clearly, without the multi-directional effect I'd experienced during his physical manifestation. "Danny's been preparing for this communication session since we received word about your employment with the facility. He's standing by for personal contact." I handed the telephone to Dr. Vasquez for official protocol documentation, then positioned myself in front of Mirror 7 according to Jake's positioning instructions. The reflection shifted, showing a different room where someone waited beside communication equipment that looked like a combination of mirrors and electronic devices. Danny appeared in the reflection, looking exactly as I remembered but wearing clothes I didn't recognize. Practical garments that seemed designed for navigating environments with variable physical laws. He raised his hand in greeting, and I realized that for the first time in months, the gesture wasn't a goodbye. Danny's voice came through the dimensional communication system exactly as I remembered it. Slightly higher than most people expected, with the habit of ending statements like questions when he was excited about something. "Marcus, you look different. More focused, maybe." He leaned closer to whatever communication device existed on his side of mirror reality. "Dr. Martinez told me you're working with anomalous objects now. That's pretty wild considering you used to get frustrated when the photocopier jammed at school." I laughed, and the sound felt foreign after months of clinical documentation and protocol adherence. The job found me after what happened at the river. I needed answers. "About the crossing?" "It wasn't traumatic like you probably imagined. One moment I was standing in water up to my waist. Next moment I was in a place where water moves according to intention rather than gravity." Danny gestured towards something outside the mirror's viewing range. "Reality here operates on different principles, but it's not dangerous, just organized differently." Jake documented our conversation, while Dr. Vasquez monitored dimensional stability readings. The grandfather clock in storage level C had chimed exactly 7 times that morning, a pattern that indicated optimal conditions for extended communication sessions. "I want you to know I'm okay," Danny continued. "Better than okay, actually. The research work here involves studying dimensional intersection points throughout multiple realities. I'm helping map portal locations that could eventually allow regular travel between dimensions. He explained how mirror reality contained geographical features similar to our world, but with locations that existed in multiple places simultaneously. The Kern River where he'd crossed over connected to 17 different dimensional variants, each one containing versions of familiar landmarks, arranged according to alternative physical laws. The people here aren't entities or supernatural beings, Danny said, responding to questions I'd been afraid to ask. They're researchers, families, individuals who crossed over during portal events throughout history. Dr. Martinez estimates that dimensional crossings have been occurring for centuries, but only recently have redeveloped communication methods that work between realities. Dr. Vasquez handed me a prepared list of questions developed by the facility's administration. Inquiries about dimensional physics, portal scheduling, and research coordination between realities. But I set the list aside and asked the question that mattered most. Do you want to come back? Danny was quiet for several moments, consulting with someone outside the mirror's viewing range. The portal cycle that would allow return travel occurs in 17 months. But Marcus, the research opportunities here are extraordinary. We're mapping how consciousness interacts with dimensional boundaries, studying how memory transfers between realities, documenting how emotional connections create resonance patterns that span multiple dimensions. He paused, then smiled with the same expression I'd seen thousands of times during family gatherings and camping trips. Besides, you're finally doing work that matters. Teaching was good, but this research could change how humanity understands reality itself. We're both exactly where we need to be. The communication session lasted 2 hours. We exchanged information about our respective research projects, compared dimensional physics to standard scientific principles, and planned regular contact schedules that would allow ongoing collaboration between facility teams. When the session ended, I remained in front of Mirror 7 for several minutes, watching as the reflection returned to showing empty office space in mirror reality. The telephone fell silent, but not with the heavy quiet I'd experienced after Danny's disappearance. The silence felt full of potential rather than loss. I returned to my workstation in storage level C, where the coffee thermos had produced a fresh cup of the Bakersfield blend I'd shared with Danny during our last camping trip. As I began documenting the communication session, I realized that my observation logs no longer read like scientific reports written by someone trying to understand tragedy through data collection. They read like correspondence between research teams working toward the same goals from different dimensions, connected by protocols that turned anomalous objects into communication tools, and united by the understanding that reality contains more possibilities than any single dimension could contain. Item C-247 continues producing perfect coffee every morning, and I've stopped questioning how it knows exactly what I need.